In 29 blistering seconds, the marble floors of Congress shook underneath the burden of Jasmine Crockett's phrases. But earlier than 40 million individuals, holding their breath, she cornered Donald Trump, the 5-time draft dodger, as a conflict hero, located his prosthetic leg on the desk among them. The cameras stuck every twitch, each bead of sweat. What fact changed into so explosive? It is able to shatter the image of a person who as soon as held the maximum powerful seat in the global. The red tally light above the main camera blinked to life, and in that instant, 40 million Americans have been drawn into the equal charged area. Under the Oversight Committee's relentless white lights, the hearing chamber didn't sense like a place for measured discussion. It felt just like the establishing body of a political battle movie. The air became thick with a low hum of whispered hypothesis, and the marble walls regarded to lean in, ready to witness something that they had in no way forget about. Cameras from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox swept across the room, attempting to find the precise moment that could define the day. The side door opened. Jasmine Crockett stepped in with a stride that was deliberate, nearly surgical in its precision. Every step of her heels towards the polished marble echoed like a countdown, pulling every eye closer to her. She wasn't scanning for pleasant faces. She turned into taking inside the battlefield. Her army match became sharply tailored, but it became her eye steady, sharp and unblinking, that made the room sense smaller. Throughout the desk, Donald Trump leaned returned in his chair, the corners of his mouth curled into a smirk he'd worn through scandals, depositions, and rallies. His arms have been folded loosely, but the knuckles widened just enough to betray the anxiety below. On either aspect of him, Loyalade sat angled forward, murmuring brief phrases, not to guide him, however. To ensure the optics have been right at each tilt of the pinnacle, each flick of the wrist felt rehearsed for the cameras. In the blink of an eye fixed, the scene reduced grainy black and white stills flashing in the minds of individuals who knew the records. A younger Trump in a tailored coat out of doors of New York brownstone. Headlines from 1968 blaring draft lottery. Numbers announced. Handwritten notes on scientific paperwork mentioning bone spurs. 5 deferments in overall. Now not a single day in uniform. No longer a unmarried night in a foxhole. Now not a unmarried footstep within the dust of Vietnam. The chamber snapped again to the present, however the comparison hung inside the air like smoke. In the back of Jasmine within the gallery sat Guyzan. Girls with ribbons and medals pinned to their chests, faces covered by years of service, eyes sharpened via loss. They did not speak, but their silence had a weight all its personal. One of them, a wide-shouldered man with an empty space beneath his left knee, watched the table with the point of interest of a person who knew a fight turned into coming. Jasmine diminished herself into her seat, never breaking posture. Her hand slid to a skinny manila envelope and tapped the corner in opposition to the table as soon as, 2 times, simply sufficient to make the cameras twitch their cognizance. She didn't look down at it, failed to draw attention to it directly. The envelope sat in plain view, a small silent wrist wrapped in beige paper. The anchors in the media row leaned closer to their mics, reducing their voices. Somewhere inside the control room, a manufacturer's voice crackled in an anchor's earpiece. Stay on her fingers. Don't cut. The envelope wasn't shifting, however the tension round it grew like a typhoon cloud. Trump glanced at it as soon as Speedy, then seemed away. It was the smallest flicker, however it turned into enough to ship a ripple through the room. Each reporter, each spectator, each viewer at home could feel it. The know-how that whatever was in her may want to flip this listening to from political theater into political detonation. And because the silence stretched between them, one query started out to shape in thousands and thousands of minds sharp as a blade. What fact might be interior that envelope that could eventually wipe the smirk from Donald Trump's face and change the path of the day for all time? Underneath the unblinking glare of the committee lights, the camera drifted from Jasmine's table to the gallery. This is whilst the United States saw him looking Daniel Reeves. His body became vast, his again instantly as though the uniform were still on his shoulders. The silver megastar gleamed on his jacket, catching a flash of mild every time a digicam panned. One leg stretched ahead, the alternative ended easy above the knee, the space stuffed by an elegant black prosthetic. He didn't move, did not talk. His eyes have been locked on Donald Trump with the kind of regular, unflinching attention that said, "This wasn't simply politics, it was personal." Jasmine adjusted her microphone, her voice clean and unhurried. When you consider that 2017, funding for VA housing has been reduced via 27%. She allowed the figure hold within the air like smoke. Throughout the equal duration, veteran homelessness has risen to the best rate in more than a decade. The weight of her phrases seemed to press down at the room. A veteran in the 2D row regarded down on the ground. A reporter iced over mid-sentence over his notepad. From throughout the desk got here a low snicker. Trump leaned again in his chair, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "We call that financial location," he stated almost lazily, like he turned into explaining a commercial enterprise deal to a toddler. Clever commercial enterprise cuts waste, his aides gave faint understanding smiles, the type meant for cameras, no longer for humans. A wave of gasoline rippled through the gallery. The press row erupted in scribbles, the pointy scratching of pens and furious tapping of keyboards. Someplace within the lower back, a muffled implausible slipped into the air. The Fox camera zoomed in on Trump's face, the CNN digicam on Jasmine's. Aspect by way of side, the comparison become jarring. One looking like he just instructed a joke, the alternative like she simply heard a confession. Jasmine didn't recoil. She leaned forward, elbows at the table, and spoke in a tone so measured it reduced sharper than any shout. "Is that this what you name assisting the troops, Mr. Trump?" Her phrases landed heavy. The sound technician's needle jumped slightly, now not from extent, but from the weight in her voice. In the gallery, Sergeant Reeves' jaw tightened, his prosthetic leg shifting a fragment on the ground. For a heartbeat, Trump's smirk faltered the corners of his mouth, dipping before snapping returned up. He reached for his glass of water, drank without meeting her eyes, then set it down a little too tough. The microphones stuck the tender thud. Jasmine's gaze never left him, not once. Her hand moved to the thin manila envelope on her table, just a light brush of her fingertips alongside the threshold, sufficiento draw every camera's cognizance. The envelope stayed closed, but the anxiety it carried regarded to thicken the air. One among Trump's aides leaned in to whisper something, but he brushed them off without searching far away from Jasmine. The veterans within the room sat like statues, their silence louder than any outcry. Reeves leaned forward now, the silver celebrity catching some other flash. The space between the two essential gamers, the congresswoman and the former president, felt as though it had gotten smaller 2 inches. Regardless of the table among them. And somewhere in dwelling rooms and places of work throughout the USA, an unmarried query tightened its grip. Would Jasmine Crockett cross immediately for Donald Trump's military report in the front of thousands and thousands? Or was she protecting something even greater, devastating inside the envelope? Jasmine's arms lingered on the brink of the envelope, then slid away. She reached for a thin folder as an alternative. Her moves unhurried, her gaze locked on Trump. When she opened it, the shuffle of paper appeared louder than it ought to had been, as if the entire room became leaning in to hear. She adjusted the mic, then examined in a constant, unflinching voice, Donald J. Trump, Selective Service Wide Variety 50, 42, 40. 5 deferments, occupied with bone spurs. The phrases landed like cold steel. She grew to become each page slowly, her eyes in no way leaving the text. 1968, 1969, 1970, 1971, 1972. Every 12 months dropped into the silence like a stone into water. At the back of her, Sergeant Reeves' jaw clenched tighter, and a few veterans in the gallery shifted in their seats. It wasn't anger on their faces. It was something less warm. Trump gave a half-smile, leaning into the mic. Old information, faux news. I have been listening to this for many years. His tone became dismissive, however his hand gripped the armrest just a little too difficult. The cameras caught the white of his knuckles. His aides scribbled on notepads without looking up, pretending this changed into just every other line of attack he should shrug off. Jasmine failed to blink. Antique wounds do not heal while you hold, making them bleed. The phrases have been sharp, however quiet, every syllable planned. She set the papers down in the front of her, the formidable black ink of the legitimate facts seen to absolutely everyone close sufficient to see. No statement, no embellishment, simply the truth sitting there in simple view. The director's feed. Cut to a split screen. At the left, Trump's face smirked nevertheless in location, however eyes tighter than earlier than at the right, a bar in Ohio packed with veterans watching the listening to live. A man in a faded Marine Corps jacket shook his head slowly. Another muttered something below his breath, his beer untouched. In the back, a girl with a purple coronary heart pin crossed her fingers, her expression carved from stone. Lower back inside the chamber, the anxiety thickened. The sound of paper sliding on timber seemed louder, heavier. Trump shifted in his chair, clearing his throat, however no words got here. Jasmine permit the silence stretch, refusing to rescue him from it. Each digital camera stayed constant on her, waiting for the subsequent strike. She tapped the top page with one finger, the movement informal but planned. 5 possibilities to serve. 5 chances to face beside the ladies and men you currently name. Heroes. And every unmarried time you found a way out, she failed to raise her voice. She didn't want to. The veterans within the gallery had been already leaning forward. Trump glanced at the envelope once more, brief like a person checking a locked door. Then he appeared back at Jasmine, forcing the smirk to leave. "You're making lots of drama out of nothing," he said. But even as he spoke, the digicam stuck the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. Jasmine did not reply right away. She reached over, located one hand flat on the manila envelope, and left it there, no longer beginning it, now not transferring it, just letting the gesture hold inside the air like a storm cloud approximately to interrupt. Someplace in the gallery, Sergeant Reeves exhaled slowly. In the bar, a veteran leaned towards the television, muttering, "Come on, show him." And in houses across the country, the query burned warmer with every passing 2D. What record ought to probably be interior, the envelope that could eventually silence Donald Trump's smirk for precise? Jasmine's hand finally broke the suspense. She slid the manila envelope closer, lifted the flap, and drew out an unmarried sheet encased in a clean plastic sleeve. The paper was yellowed with age, the typewritten traces crisp but fading. She held it up simply high enough for the front row cameras to size this. She said her voice even as a copy of Donald Trump's 1968 medical exemption letter. Bone Spurs. Signed by way of his own family medical doctor. The room didn't pass, however it reacted. A low ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery. At the overhead display, the letter's information filled the left facet. On the right, an archival picture of Trump in a golf blouse mid-swing taken that identical year. The assessment hit like a body blow. Veterans within the returned row exchanged glances. One shaking his head slowly. Trump shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing for a breakup second earlier than the smirk again. "I've built skyscrapers, run billion-dollar groups, created jobs for heaps," he stated, leaning into the mic. "SMY provider." The pivot changed into sharp, rehearsed, an antique circulate from an antique playbook. His aides nodded like that they had heard something exquisite. But Jasmine failed to look away. "The difference, Mr. Trump," she said, tapping the letter with one manicured finger, "is that jobs do not stop bullets." Her tone turned into consistent. But the edges had been steel. The gallery erupted in a sharp consumption of breath, just like the room had flinched all at once. The cut-up screen stayed. On the left, the letter and date and the doctor's looping signature. On the right, that frozen picture of an excellent golf swing, the club glinting inside the solar. The assessment wasn't simply visual. It became ethical. A document of a man keeping off provider beside proof he became playing games while others bled. Trump began speaking again, quicker this time. "That is a witch hunt, much like the whole lot else. You human beings do not recognize what I have finished for veterans. His voice rose half of a pitch, the sound losing that smooth self-assurance. He gestured vaguely, attempting to comb the point of interest far away from the paper in Jasmine's hand. She allowed him communicate. Let him stretch the rope. Then she reduced the letter onto the desk, sliding it towards the committee clerk for the file. We recognize carrier, Mr. Trump. What we do not respect, she stated, eyes locked on his, is a person pretending they have got given it. The silent sign a while become the type that includes wait. In the gallery, Sergeant Daniel Reeves hadn't moved till now, his hand tightened across the armrest of his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath the strain. His gaze became constant now, not on the letter, but on Trump himself, measuring him. Sizing him up like a soldier, analyzing an opponent's weakness. The cameras stuck it, and tens of millions watching at home should feel it. Something changed into about to appear. And the query that crackled in the air became the equal in each thoughts. Why turned into Sergeant Reeves, leaning ahead now, his grip tightening as if he knew the following moment could change the entirety. Jasmine, permit the silence stretched. And grew to become towards the gallery. Her voice softened, however it carried through each mic. I would like to introduce a person who knows what service looks like. She gestured to the second row, and every digicam in the room pivoted right away. Sergeant Daniel Reeves, Silver Superstar recipient, Iraq conflict veteran, misplaced his leg in Mosul. Reeves rose slowly, his prosthetic catching the mild as he straightened. The medals on his chest were an ornament. They had been testimony. He progressed, every movement planned, the faint metal sound of his prosthetic foot hitting the marble echoing inside the stillness. When he stopped beside Jasmine, he failed to look at her. He appeared straight at Donald Trump. I was 19, Reeves stated, his voice low, but unshakable. 19 once ibled for this us of a, his gaze did not waver. You had been 22 while you determined a way not to. The phrases landed heavy. No want for volume. The complete room froze like the air itself had thickened. Even the press row went still. Pens hovered above paper. One digicam operator blinked 2 times, nearly forgetting to follow his shot. The best sound became the hum of the lighting and the faint shuffle of a chair within the lower back row. Trump's smirk had flattened, but his jaw labored like he became chewing on the moment. Reeves failed to fill the silence. He let it work. He stood there in his uniform, every inch of him, a reminder of the price-off provider. His prosthetic became angled ahead, sparkling below the lights as though it too was part of the announcement. Jasmine sat quietly, her fingers folded, letting him personal the room. Someplace in the target audience, a veteran exhaled difficult through his nostril. Another leaned forward in his seat, eyes locked on Reeves. The electricity within the chamber shifted. This wasn't politics anymore. It changed into personal, and everyone should sense it. Trump leaned toward his mic, however the words didn't come. He swallowed and seemed away for 1/2 second, then back once more. Reeves simply stood there unblinking, his hand resting at the lower back of Jasmine's chair. The cameras caught each flicker, every diffused crack in the former president's composure. And then Reeves' grip on the chair tightened. His stance modified, weight moving forward. Something in his eyes had moved from calm to cause. Human beings within the front row noticed first, glancing at each other. Even Jasmine tilted her head, barely reading him due to the fact anything Sergeant Daniel Reeves turned into about to do subsequent, it wasn't going to be in the script. And the query, striking over the room, sharp and electric-powered, became simple. What flow become this war hero about to make that no person in the United States would see coming? Reeves did not say every other word. He reached down with each hands. His movement sluggish but sure, and commenced unlocking the straps round his knee. The sound of the buckles snapping open changed into faint, however in the silent chamber, it reduced through like gunfire. Every digital camera swung in the direction of him, lenses adjusting, shutters clicking in bursts. In one motion, he lifted the prosthetic and gripped it tight. The steel caught the mild, bloodless, unblinking. Without breaking eye contact, Reeves stepped forward and slammed it onto the desk. The thunk hit like a gavel. Gasps tore through the gallery. Flashes lit the room, bouncing off his silver superstar in the metallic. Within seconds, the clip became live anywhere, this became the shot that might define the hearing. Trump stiffened. His smirk gone. His eyes darted from the prosthetic to Reeves, then to Jasmine and again. It wasn't worry exactly. It changed into something harder to mask the uncooked soreness of being faced with a reality you can't laugh off. His hand shifted on the desk hands, tapping as soon as, 2 times before going nevertheless. Jasmine didn't leave out the outlet. She leaned ahead, her voice low however carrying to the lower back row. That's what provider looks as if. She let the phrases breathe for a beat, her eyes locked on Trump. What's yours? The sentence landed like a punch in the ribs, and the room held its breath for the solution that did not come. Reeves stepped returned, leaving the prosthetic in which it become. Like an show-off entered into evidence. The steel glinted inside the light impossible to ignore. Trump's aides shifted uncomfortably of their seats. One accomplishing for a notepad without writing a factor. The complete tableau, the veteran's empty pant leg, the leg itself at the table. Trump seated inches away, become a picture nosepin ought to soften. In the back of the room, someone whispered, "Oh my God." And the words appeared to echo. The gallery stayed frozen, eyes shifting between Jasmine and Trump, ready to see which one would break the silence. Even the journalists had stopped typing, their fingers soaring over keys like they were afraid to miss the subsequent line. Trump's shoulders twitched a diffused shift like he was about to push himself up from the chair. His gaze flicked as soon as extra to the cameras, then to the go out, then again to the cameras again. The calculation become written on his face and take the hits or stroll out and flip the instant into an admission. Jasmine did not pass. Reeves did not blink. The prosthetic leg sat between them like a line within the sand. And the simplest query that mattered now, gripping all of us in that chamber and each viewer looking at domestic, became this: would Donald Trump stroll out and give up the stage or live and try to combat back? Trump subsequently leaned forward, both hands on the table, his voice sharp sufficient to slice through the quiet. "This is all just political theater," he stated, jabbing a finger in Jasmine's path. "You're parading veterans around like props because you have nothing actual to say." The words landed heavy, intended to wound, however carried a protecting edge that the cameras caught instantly. Inside the gallery, a few gasps broke the silence. At the live feed, his base lit up the chat streams, hearts clapping emojis. "Inform her, Mr. President," filling the sidebars. To them, this turned into their fighter swinging again. Trump glanced toward the cameras as though to drink inside the guide, but his jaw stayed tight. The prosthetic leg nevertheless sat among them, a reminder he couldn't pretty avoid. Jasmine failed to balk. She stayed flawlessly nevertheless, hands folded, her expressions constant. She permit him speak. Permit him dig. "You have lots of nerve," Trump endured, his voice growing. "I've done more for veterans than any president in history. Ask all people. Observe the VA choice application. Have a look at the funding increases." Every point came faster, like a man sprinting through his protection earlier than the ground gave way below him. The control room feed switched to a cut-up screen once more on one facet. Trump leaning and eyes flashing. On the other, Jasmine sitting again. Unreadable, like she changed into looking the previous couple of pieces of allure slide into place. The chat feed scrolled faster, his supporters cheering. However, other reactions started shooting up. Skeptical faces, shaking heads, captions reading genuinely. And receipts. Surprising. Reeves shifted in his seat, eyes in no way leaving Trump. His fists were loosely clenched in his knees now, his respiratory gradual. Inside the again row, a veteran whispered to the man beside him, but did not take his eyes off the desk. Every person appeared to realize there has been a turn coming. Trump's voice pushed on, looking to fill each inch of the gap. "That is a waste of taxpayer money. That is a circus. You grandstanding because you realize you cannot touch me on the facts." He leaned returned once more, forcing a smirk, however it failed to reach his eyes. The camera stuck at the temporary lapse, the faint flicker that stated he knew. The floor beneath him turned into moving. Jasmine tilted her head barely, nearly like she became analyzing him. Her eyes moved to the letter on the table, then to the prosthetic leg, nevertheless in plain sight, then lower back to Trump. She hadn't raised her voice as soon as. She hadn't interrupted. However, there has been something in her stillness, a sign to the ones looking intently that she became conserving something he wasn't ready for. The gallery changed into silent now, every eye swinging among them. Within the bar in Ohio, a collection of veterans leaned towards the television, one muttering, "She's got him right wherein she wishes him." And in that razor-skinny second, the question striking over the hearing and throughout thousands and thousands of screens turned into easy. What card became Jasmine Crockett about to play that could flip the narrative in an instant and flip Donald Trump's attack into his own undoing? Jasmine finally moved her chair, sliding lower back just sufficient to interrupt the stillness. She reached for a far off on the table and clicked once. The large display behind the committee desk lit up, washing the room in a chilly glow. On June 14, she commenced Congress surpassed a bipartisan bill to growth investment for VA hospitals. The president was scheduled to sign it in person. Her eyes locked on Trump, however he failed to. The display screen shifted, and there it was, a high-resolution photo of Donald Trump mid-swing on a pristine Florida golfing path. The date stamp in the corner matched the day of the signing ceremony. The shot became almost cruel in its readability. Shiny blue sky, lush green fairway. The arc of the club frozen simply earlier than it struck the ball. On the bottom right, a information siren study, VA hospital funding. Bill signed White House proxy attends. A low rumble of voices rolled via the gallery. Veterans leaned toward every other, muttering beneath their breath. One man in a faded navy cap shook his head hard, lips pressed tight. Any other seated behind Reeves whispered something sharp sufficient to make his seatmate's eyes narrow in settlement. The sound wasn't loud, however it became risky. The type of noise that announces the room is turning. Trump shifted in his chair, lips parting like he became about to talk, then final again. His hand reached for his water glass, but he did not drink. His eyes flicked from the picture to the veterans in the gallery, then returned to Jasmine, as if gauging simply how a long way she became inclined head. Jasmine kept her voice stage, her tone almost conversational. "Dr. Trump, you dispatched a proxy to signal an invoice for our veterans. Due to the fact you have been here." She pointed to the image without looking at it. No longer in a medical institution. Now not with the men and women who earned that funding. Right here, working on your lower backswing. The photograph stayed on screen, unblinking. It became larger than lifestyles, and nobody inside the room could appearance everywhere else. Even the aides at Trump's aspect prevented his eye. Reeves sat immobile, however his hand curled tighter across the armrest of his chair. Inside the manipulate room, producers called for a decent shot at the veteran section. The feed reduced to them. Live crossed palms, set jaws, eyes fixed on the man on the desk. It wasn't outrage on my own. It turned into something heavier. A sort of quiet that means human beings are identifying they have got visible enough. Jasmine failed to develop the slide. She let it hold there, the photograph doing more damage than any sentence could. The silence stretched and each 2D it grew sharper, greater reducing. And then she clicked the far away again, the screen flickering simply sufficient to jolt the room. Something became coming next was nevertheless hidden. However, every face in the gallery leaned embracing. The question burned warmer than the lighting above. How could the veterans react once they noticed the next slide? The golf course faded from the screen, replaced by way of a stark white slide. No glossy pics, no shade, just a easy bar chart that hit harder than any picture. The pink columns rose year-beer, hiking like a sluggish, unstoppable tide. Across the pinnacle in bold black letters, 20th% growth in homeless veterans 2017 to 2020. The room went nevertheless, the sort of nonetheless in which even the hum of the light seemed to dim. Jasmine stepped towards the screen, remote in hand, her eyes sweeping the gallery earlier than locking on Trump. "These are not abstract figures," she stated, her voice low regular. "They may be folks that served, slept inside the dust for this United States of America, came domestic and slept on concrete." She clicked the far-flung again, and the bars have been replaced by faces, veterans dozing on park benches below overpasses in crowded shelters with their assets in plastic luggage. A few wore caps embroidered with their unit's call. Others clutched framed photos of households they had lost contact with. The images were unfiltered and unflinching. Trump's chair creaked as he shifted. His eyes narrowed, but he stated not anything. The aides beside him saved their heads down, flipping via papers they didn't study. In the gallery, Sergeant Reeves' jaw became rigid, his gaze locked on the faces on the display screen. A person within the second row muttered something too low to capture, however his fists were clenched on his knees. Jasmine's voice wavered just enough for the microphones to choose up the break. "Numbers don't salute a flag, human beings do." She permit the phrases hold the silence after them, heavy and unbroken. You can nearly sense the weight selecting the room, pressing into each seat, every digicam lens. The feed reduced to a bar in Pennsylvania where veterans looking live lean ahead. Eyes hard. One shook his head. Some other slammed a fist softly on the table. The bartender muted the sound for a second, however no person looked away from the display. Yet again inside the chamber, Jasmine became to Trump. "You speak approximately loyalty. You talk approximately power. But this," she gestured to the faces, "is the truth to your watch." Her tone didn't upward thrust, however the precision of each word felt like the tightening of a vice. Trump reached for his mic, then stopped. His hands drummed once at the table, then stilled. The smirk was long gone now, changed by means of something closer to calculation or maybe pain. The chart reappeared at the display screen, the rising crimson bars impossible to disregard. Jasmine didn't fill the gap with more numbers. She certainly stood there, eyes locked on the person across from her, ready. The cameras stayed on them both, capturing the stillness, the unspoken mission. And as the seconds stretched, it was impossible not to marvel. Became this the moment Jasmine Crockett had sooner or later pushed Donald Trump to the brink, in which his most effective circulate left would be to lash out or walk away? The chart was still sparkling at the screen whilst the storm broke out of doors the chamber walls. At the live feed, a wave of tweets commenced flooding in so speedy the networks ought to barely hold up. Bonespurget trended in minutes. Veterans groups tagged each information outlet disturbing answers. Screenshots of the prosthetic leg at the desk ricocheted across FB, Instagram, TikTok, each caption sharper than the closing. In newsrooms across the USA, anchors pressed fingers to their earpieces as producers whispered updates. VF countrywide. Account just weighed in. One anchor murmured off camera. Every other leaned in closer to her co-host. The American Legion is calling for an research. On MSNBC, a cut-up display screen confirmed the hearing on one aspect and asked a social media ticker on the other. Comments pouring in from veterans who'd fought in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Within the listening to room, the strength shifted again. Human beings within the press row were now glancing at their telephones between notes, their faces flickering in the mild of incoming indicators. A reporter mouthed something to his colleague, 3 phrases, "It's blowing up." The tender murmur of the gallery grew a stressed undertone that wasn't there an hour in the past. Trump noticed. His eyes darted towards the cameras with more frequency, now scanning like a man seeking to degree the harm in real time. The aides at his facet were both bent over their phones, thumbs shifting fast. One leaned in and whispered, however Trump's reaction changed into a barely perceptible shake of his head. Jasmine did not study a single screen. She sat nevertheless, eyes at the table, letting the noise outdoor build like a growing tide. She didn't want to feed it. The fact turned into doing that on its personal. Each photo, every clip, each variety she'd laid out changed into already inside the bloodstream of the net, and it changed into shifting speedy. From the again row, a young reporter leaned ahead, maintaining up his smartphone simply sufficient for the character next to him to appear. The headline in ambitious letters: Examine, Veterans Agency's Name Emergency Press Convention. His associate's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't just trending. It becoming something bigger. And it turned into occurring live. The hearing room felt smaller now, tighter, as though the air had thickened with all of the eyes outdoor looking in. Even the regular hum of the digicam seemed louder. Someplace in the press section, a phone buzzed so hard it rattled towards the desk. The reporter snatched it up, examined the display screen, and at once commenced typing like his life trusted it. And just as Jasmine seemed up from her notes, one of the anchors inside the media row touched her earpiece once more, eyes going extensive. She turned to the journalist beside her and mouthed a sentence that made his pen freeze mid-word. What breaking information had simply come through that could crash directly into the center of this hearing? The buzz from the gallery hadn't even settled whilst a voice reduced in from the media row. Fact exams in a reporter. Whispered eyes locked on the pill in front of him. The words moved speedy, handed in low murmurs from seat to seat. Within seconds, each screen in the click section lit up with the identical headline. Unbiased Truth Test. Confirms Crockett claims on VA cuts and draft deferments. The networks didn't wait. CNN flashed a red showed banner beneath Jasmine's image. MSNBC ran bullet points aspect by using facet with the Gulf direction photo, each one stamped with an inexperienced check mark. Even a Fox information feed in the Nook showed a quiet replace. Statistics confirmed by using congressional research carrier. The impact turned into immediately. The murmurs within the gallery sharpened right into a low, unified hum. At the witness table, Trump's legal professional shot to his toes. That is prejudicial and out of order. He barked, pointing toward the media room. They are feeding false narratives into this proceeding in real time. His voice rose over the rustle of papers and the press of cameras. But the committee chair failed to draw back. She leaned into her mic voice, cutting via the noise like a blade. The committee will take into report any independently tested information. Sit down, counsel. Her gavel struck once, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Trump's attorney hesitated for one half a beat earlier than decreasing himself lower back into his seat, his jaw tight. Jasmine didn't appearance up from her notes as she failed to need to. Each screen inside the room became doing the paintings for her now. In the back of her, the veterans within the gallery shifted ahead in their chairs, watching the monitors with grim pleasure. Sergeant Reeves's hand rested on his knee, palms drumming as soon as earlier than going nonetheless. Trump attempted to speak, however the committee chair's voice overrode him. Allow the record mirror Congresswoman Crockett's statements regarding VA budget cuts, veteran homelessness, and the president's draft deferments are factually correct. The sentence hit the chamber like a frame blow, measured, formal, and devastating. The live feed caught the instant in cut-up display. On one aspect, Trump's eyes, narrowing lips pressed skinny. On the other, Jasmine sitting calm and nevertheless. Her arms folded neatly on the table. Within the press row, journalists typed with a speed that blurred their hands. The tale already breaking in real time. Someplace within the gallery, a cell phone buzzed. Then any other. A ripple-off vibration regarded to pass via the room, now not from noise, however from the manner heads started out to tilt toward sparkling displays. One journalist gasped quietly, covering the mic on his headset. "You are no longer going to believe this," he muttered to his producer. Jasmine caught the shift, the subtle flicker inside the crowd's interest. She knew the rhythm of a room, and this became no normal distraction. Something new had simply entered the bloodstream of the story. Something massive enough to pull eyes off the table and into the digital ether. And as the whispers grew, one query took root within the minds of everyone. Gift. What piece of evidence had just landed from foreign places that would tilt this listening into an entirely new battlefield? The committee chair adjusted her glasses and glanced towards the overhead reveal. "We have a faraway witness joining us," she said, her tone crisp. The screen flickered, then resolved into the face of an older guy in a simple button-down blouse. The faint hum of a medical workplace at the back of him. The decrease 0.33 image examine, Dr. Ethan Cole, retired U.S. Navy physician. Cole did not waste time. I served as an Army doctor for 32 years. He commenced voice steady and unadorned. In 1968, I reviewed the Selective Provider Scientific Report for Donald J. Trump. The diagnosis of bone spurs become a political want. The words landed like a dropped hammer. The gallery gasped, reporter's head snapping closer to the display screen. Trump's face tightened instantly, the muscular tissues in his jaw pulling taut. His smirk became long past, replaced via something sharper, heavier. His aides leaned in near, whispering rapid and occasional. One scribbled something on a felony pad, slid it toward him, but Trump pushed it back without reading. Dr. Cole stored, going unflinching. I was asked to log off at the office work despite there being no medical evidence to guide the claim. I refused, however any other physician recognoscito the Trump circle of relatives signed it days later. The manage room cut to a tight shot of Trump's fingers on the table, hands curling into a fist. Inside the gallery, veterans exchanged darkish glances. Sergeant Reeves shifted forward in his seat, his prosthetic creating a faint click on the ground. One guy in a Marine Corps jacket muttered, their itis below his breath. The air inside the chamber felt heavier now, thick with the feel that something buried for many years had just been pulled into the mild. Trump's voice finally broke via loud and sharp. That is a smear activity. This guy does not realize me. Doesn't understand the records. The committee chair cut him off with an unmarried rap of the gavel d'amar. Trump, you may have an opportunity to respond after the witness has completed. Cole's eyes didn't waver from the digital camera. The deferments saved him out of Carrier, even as others his age had been drafted and deployed. I knew young men who died in Vietnam with much less excessive accidents than what become claimed in that record. His tone failed to rise, however the weight of the announcement crammed the room. The cut-up display feed confirmed Trump leaning returned. Now, hands crossed, lips pressed into a skinny line. His aides were nonetheless talking in low burst, however he wasn't listening. The instant had already burned itself into the public file. Jasmine sat motionless, watching him soak up it. She didn't need to talk. The silence itself became pressing in. The screen in the back of her iced up on Cole's face. His closing words nonetheless placing within the air like the echo of a verdict. And because the room settled into that brittle, dangerous quiet. One query hovered over every Headwood medical doctor. Cole's testimony cracked the damn extensive open, unleashing the entirety else humans had been too afraid to mention. Jasmine allowed the weight of Dr. Cole's words linger earlier. Then speaking once more. Her tone softened, both her gaze stayed locked on Trump. I want to carry ahead a person whose tale speaks for itself. She became toward the gallery. Marcy Hill, a lady in her early 40s, stood slowly, her black get-dressed, plain but dignified. In her palms, she held a folded American flag, the rims worn from being touched too frequently. She walked to the witness desk with quiet, deliberate steps, each one echoing in the stillness. While she sat, she did not have a look at Trump proper away. She checked out the flag in her lap. My husband, team of workers Sergeant David Hill, become killed in Afghanistan in 2019. Marcy started, her voice trembling but clear. He turned into 33 years old. We had kids, 9 and 12 at the time. She paused, urgent, her hands into the folded cloth. When they introduced him domestic, I used to be informed the funeral benefits we might counted on had been long gone, cut from the finances. The room became silent except for the sound of a camera clicking somewhere within the again. I needed to borrow cash to bury him. She persisted, her voice breaking. I bought his truck, the one he rebuilt after his 2D tour. My kids watch me cry on the kitchen table looking to determine out how to pay for his or her father's gravestone. Inside the gallery, a girl dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. A person in a veteran's cap stared difficult on the ground, jaw set. Even the press row turned into nonetheless, pens hovering, eyes constant on Marcy. The sound textual content board lit up with nothing however the hum of the room. No coughs, no whispers, just the burden of her phrases. Marcy ultimately looked at Trump. "You are saying you helped the troops, however after I wanted my U.S. most, you signed a paper that instructed me I used to be on my own." Her voice steadied as she spoke the remaining phrases, but the tears in her eyes caught the light. Jasmine didn't interrupt, did not add to the moment. She let it breathe. The folded flag in Marcy's lap changed into a louder declaration than anything she may want to say. Sergeant Reeves stared immediately in advance, his fingers gripping the armrest like he ought to keep the room collectively by force. Trump shifted in his seat. His eyes flicked from Marcy to the cameras, then lower back again. His arms tapped as soon as on the table, a nearly imperceptible rhythm. The aides beside him leaned in, murmuring, but he waved them off. And in that charged stillness, the query gripped all and sundry. Might Donald Trump meet Marcy Hill's ache with empathy? Or with the conceitedness that had carried him via every other storm? Trump's chair scraped loudly against the floor as Hell lurched ahead, each palms flat on the desk, his face flushed, his voice exploding into the microphone. "This is a circus." The word circus cracked like a whip bouncing off the marble partitions. Then came the sharp hollow slam of his palm, hitting the table, picked up smooth with the aid of every mic inside the room. The sound became so loud it jolted the gallery. Newshounds iced over mid-keystroke. At the live feed, producers instantly cued the moment for replay. Inside seconds, networks have been airing it in gradual motion. The slam, the ripple via the water glasses, the flinch of an useful resource at his side. Commentators whispered over the footage like it became evidence from a crime scene. Within the chamber, the air thickened. Marcy Hill still sat on the witness desk, the folded flag clutched tightly in her lap. Her eyes did not depart Trump. Sergeant Reeves's jaw became a block of stone, his prosthetic planted solid towards the ground. The veterans at the back of them gave the impression of they have been conserving themselves lower back from "speak me out." Trump leaned on the desk, respiration hard through his nostril. "You carry out those soba tales," he snapped. "And act like I'm the villain. I've achieved greater for veterans than everyone, not greater than absolutely everyone." His voice rose with every word sharp and unsteady like he'd become seeking to reclaim floor he knew he'd lost. The committee chair rapped her gavel. As soon as a brief caution. "Mr. Trump," she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. The cameras stuck it all. The defiance, the refusal to yield. "I in the press row," someone muttered, "he's dropping it." Jasmine did not talk. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on him as if reading the exact second while stress turns into disintegrate. She didn't need to raise her voice. His changed into unraveling sufficient for each of them. Her stillness most effective made his actions appearance wilder, much less controlled. The gallery's restlessness grew. A murmur rippled through the veteran section, low, however unmistakable. The aides flanking Trump whispered urgently in his ear, their faces tight. One slid a hand discreetly closer to his papers, as if preparing for a quick exit. He jerked his shoulder away. Trump straightened all at once, eyes sweeping the room, scanning faces. For a heartbeat, he didn't talk. His lips parted like he would possibly say something measured. But then the tension pulled him return to the brink. "You humans have to be ashamed," he spat his gaze, darting to the cameras, ashamed for turning this right into a media stunt. The committee room appeared to tilt toward him, each camera lens locked in. Jasmine stayed silent, looking him resolve in real time. Her hand rested gently on the threshold of the desk, regular as his shook. And in that fragile, unstable pause, the unstated query loomed over the chamber, and each screen looking at domestic became Donald Trump approximately to arise and walk out, forsaking the hearing in the middle of his very own outburst. Jasmine driven her chair lower back slowly, the sound of timber honorable slicing through via the nerve-wracking air. She rose to her toes with planned calm, her eyes fixed at the guy throughout from her. "No, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice steady, but wearing enough pressure to fill the room without shouting. "This is America, and she merits answers." The words landed with a weight that shifted the complete chamber. The gallery erupted into applause, sharp and sudden. Veterans stood halfway from their seats, clapping with deliberate pressure. Reporters glanced up from their notes, momentarily breaking from their ordinary to look at the instant unfold. Even the committee chair paused before tapping the gavel, letting the sound wash over the room. Trump sat back, his expression caught between irritation and calculation. His fingers tapped the desk once, 2 times, then went nonetheless. The aides at his side leaned in once more, however he failed to well know them. His eyes were on Jasmine, reading her like she changed into now not a political opponent, but a direct hazard. Jasmine let the applause run its course, her arms resting lightly at the desk's aspect. She failed to smile. She did not want to. Her posture said everything that she wasn't there to trade insults. She was there to preserve him accountable inside the clearest light possible. The room for that second felt like it belonged absolutely to her. Whilst the clapping subsided, she advanced, ultimate the distance between her and the threshold of the witness desk. "You've spent years calling yourself a champion for our troops," she stated, her tone now decreased, heavier. "However, the ladies and men who fought for this USA do not need champions in speeches. They want them in motion, in budgets, inside the reality." Each phrase turned into planned, giving no space for him to interrupt. The screen behind her flickered briefly, catching Trump's interest. A thumbnail of a file regarded on the nook of the display screen before vanishing once more. It turned into short, almost too quick to notice, but some inside the gallery caught it. Murmurs started in the lower back row, spreading like the faint stir of wind before a typhoon. Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, a twitch, betraying his attention. He glanced at the screen, then lower back at Jasmine. "What are you planning now?" he requested, his voice decrease, nearly wary. She failed to answer him directly. Rather, she permitted the query hang, moving returned to her seat with the identical controlled precision she stood with. Her hand brushed over a folder thicker than the others on her table and rested there just long enough for the cameras to capture it. The silence lower back thick and expectant. Trump's gaze lingered on that folder, his posture tight. Within the gallery, Sergeant Reeves shifted ahead again, eyes locked on Jasmine as if he knew what might be in her. And because the anxiety coiled tighter, the notion Onal and Sundry's thoughts changed into the same what closing piece of evidence turned into. Jasmine Crockett preserving lower back, looking ahead to the right second to stop this listening to. With a blow he wouldn't see coming. Jasmine's hand moved to the thick folder she'd been guarding for the reason that start. She opened it slowly, pulling out an unmarried web page stamped with a crimson classified watermark, now crossed out with a bold black declassified. The air inside the chamber appeared to tighten as she walked toward the monitor. Without a word, she passed the page to the clerk who slipped it below the record camera. The screen in the back of her lit up and there it became in all its unvarnished element, a leaked Pentagon memo dated 2018. The header was unmistakable situation reallocation of VA budget finances. Underlined in pen have been the damning traces consistent with directive from the executive office funds designated for veteran housing and medical centers are to be redirected closer to infrastructure projects unrelated to veteran services. And within the margin in thick black marker, a signature of the digital camera zoomed in on Donald J. Trump. A ripple of disbelief moved through the gallery. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. A veteran inside the again row muttered something sharp, his voice low, however heavy with anger. The click row leaned in, snapping pictures, arms flying over keyboards. The memo wasn't simply numbers. It was proof of intent that Trump's jaw tightened, the muscle tissues working as his eyes locked at the projection. He reached for his mic, then stopped. His aides whispered frantically, one scribbling a "observe" and sliding it toward him. He pushed it apart without looking, his gaze nonetheless fixed on the display screen like he became inclined it to disappear. Jasmine stepped to the middle, her silhouette framed with the aid of the sparkling memo in the back of her. "This isn't rumor. This is not rumor," she said, her voice low, but worrying. "That is the Pentagon documenting and writing an instantaneous order to strip funds from those who earned them and ship it elsewhere totally She allowed the words settle the load of the evidence pressing into every nook of the room. Sergeant Reeves leaned ahead, elbows on his knees, gazing the display screen. His prosthetic leg stuck the light again, a chilly reminder of the stakes round him. The veteran sat inflexible, their eyes locked on Trump. The silence in that section wasn't passive. It changed into loaded, like the pause earlier than a verdict. Jasmine grew to become barely, letting her gaze circulate from the memo to Trump and returned again. She did not raise her voice, however the planned pace of her words made the room experience even smaller. This isn't always simply mismanagement. This is a preference, and pics let you know the entirety. You need to realize approximately someone's priorities. The projection stayed at the screen, the signature underlined in purple by the TV pictures. Group. Trump shifted in his seat, his expression stuck among defiance and something else, calculation maybe, or the first flicker of unease. And as the camera stayed locked on the sparkling memo, the question forming in each mind turned into easy. What connection was Jasmine about to draw that would turn this report from damning proof right into a fatal blow? Jasmine failed to take her eyes off Trump as she clicked the far off once more. The memo shrank to at least one aspect of the display, changed with the aid of a new set of pictures on the alternative. Gleaming towers, marinas lined with yachts, and a golfing resort sprawling foyer glowed below ideal lighting. At the bottom of every picture in ambitious white textual content were the names of the initiatives and the corporations behind them. Companies run through Trump's longtime donors and political allies, the cash intended for veteran housing and medical institution upgrades. Jasmine started, her tone gradual and deliberate. Ended up here, she pointed at the luxurious high-rise. And here, the golfing motel crammed the display screen, and right here, the quay's turquoise waters and spotless white yachts appeared to mock the veterans looking from the gallery. This wasn't about infrastructure for the public. This became about enriching the few, your few. The reaction in the veteran phase was instantaneous. Heads shook slowly, jaws clenched. A person in the second row leaned ahead, his palms clasped tight. Knuckles white. Sergeant Reeves sat like stone, but his eyes were locked at the photos, unblinking. The room carried the form of silence that wasn't vacancy. It changed into stress. Trump's expression hardened, but he didn't interrupt. His aides leaned in near, whispering their pens, scratching furiously over yellow prison pads. He tapped a finger on the table, a regular controlled beat that betrayed the electricity building under his calm exterior. Jasmine clicked again, and the numbers regarded side-by-side comparisons of the diverted funds and the budgets of every luxurious challenge. $42 million for veteran housing gone, $30 million for VA. Scientific upgrades long gone. She paused, eyes sweeping the committee, earlier than touchdown again on Trump. This isn't negligence. This isn't a clerical blunders. This is a choice and a community of folks that profited from it. The camera cut to the veterans once more. One man mouthed fantastic toth, woman beside him. Any other shook his head and muttered under his breath. They by no means stood a chance. In the press row, newshounds have been already crafting the headlines, the clatter of keys like a rapid drum beat under the tension. Jasmine stepped far away from the display, letting the photos linger at the back of her. When you are taking from people who gave the whole lot and hand it to people who have already got the entirety, that's now not leadership, it is betrayal. Her voice stayed calm, but the echo of the phrase betrayal appeared to bounce off the chamber walls and dangle in the air. The committee members shifted in their seats, glancing at each other. A few leaned in the direction of their microphones. Others whispered to aides, their expressions tight. The environment felt one of a kind now. No longer just a hearing, but the first rumble earlier than a formal pass. And because the cameras panned across the anxious faces on the Ds, one question loomed over the room and the millions watching at domestic. What could the committee do now that the dots were connected so in reality and so publicly? Jasmine stepped again to the middle of the room, the pictures of yachts and golfing lodges nonetheless sparkling at the back of her. She rested both fingers at the table, leaning in only enough to close the space among herself and the committee participants. This isn't always the quid of the communication, she stated, her voice sharp but measured. That is the start of responsibility. The phrase landed heavy, drawing the eyes of each digicam within the chamber. She straightened, scanning the faces earlier than her. I am calling for a formal research into the diversion of VA price range. Under the Trump management, she persisted every syllable planned. And I am calling for full restitution, each greenback taken from our veterans again with hobby. Her gaze swept toward the veteran phase due to the fact they've paid enough, extra than sufficient. Inside the gallery, heads nodded slowly. Sergeant Reeves didn't move, however his eyes locked on her with the kind of consciousness that stated he'd been waiting to hear those words. Ality in the second row blinked back tears. The clicking row got here alive with frantic typing, the click of keys mixing into the low hum of the cameras. Trump sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly at the desk. His gaze stayed fixed someplace just beyond Jasmine's shoulder, as though refusing to fulfill her eyes would make the moment less real. The smirk, the interruptions, the deflections, they have been long gone. What replaced them was stillness, and in that stillness changed into the unmistakable sound of a person calculating his next move. Jasmine failed to permit the silence visit. Waste. Those women and men placed their lives on the line for this as of a, she said, her voice tightening. They failed to ask for a parade. They did not ask for a slogan. They requested for what they had been promised and that they had been betrayed. She allowed the phrase grasp again, heavier this time, her tone nearly bowled everybody to project it. A committee member leaned closer to his mic, whispering to the chair. Another flipped via the hearing's reliable binder, his expression hardening. The experience of momentum inside the room had shifted, transferring towards something formal, something irreversible. The veterans within the gallery leaned forward as one, the rows of them now silent however watchful as Sergeant Reeves's prosthetic tapped softly towards the ground, an unconscious beat within the price quiet. Even the newshounds had stopped whispering to each other, their interest locked at the alternate between the two figures at the middle of it all. Jasmine glanced at the memo one ultimate time before turning completely to Trump. Her eyes held his unblinking. You owe them more than words, Mr. Trump, she stated, her voice dropping just sufficient to make the room lean in. You owe them the fact. She reached for a small black device on her table, pressing an unmarried button. A crackle stuffed the speakers. Then a voice unmistakably Trump's from a recorded cell phone call, reduce the vets' budget. We're going to make it up to them with a parade, fuel ripped via the chamber, the phrases echoing under the excessive ceiling, the chamber seemed to tighten. Every breath pulled into the moment. And now the query burning in each thoughts wasn't just whether Jasmine may want to land the very last blow. It became how Trump would live to tell the tale. The sound of his own voice. Trump's chair screeched lower back against the marble floor. The sound cutting through the chamber. Without a phrase to the committee, he stood and became closer to the exit. His shoulders tight, his stride rapid. Cameras swung to observe him. Newshounds scrambling from their seats. Microphones thrust ahead. The heavy doors at the lower back opened, spilling a flash of hallway mild into the room as the clicking surged after him. In the hallway, the chaos exploded. Digital camera shutters, firing information anchors speak me over each other. Staffers shouting for space. Trump stood moving, ignoring the barrage of questions. Mr. Trump, will you respond to the allegations? Do you deny ordering the fund diversions? Headed not look back. The moment wasn't just an go out, it changed into a retreat, and each lens caught it. Back within the chamber, the sound of the door's ultimate left a vacuum. Jasmine remained at the desk, status tall, her palms resting lightly at the polished timber. Round her, veterans started out to upward thrust from their seats. Sergeant Reeves became the first to step forward, standing beside her with a silver famous person catching the light. One by one, others joined them, forming a quiet wall of presence at the back of her. The gallery's applause started out tender, nearly hesitant, before building into something regular and unshakable. Jasmine failed to enhance her palms to quiet them. She permit the sound stand. Permit it belong to the people who had earned it. Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the committee members, the clique, and ultimately the veterans at her again. The cameras inside the chamber stayed fixed on the photo Jasmine Crockett unwavering framed by way of the men and women she had fought for in that hearing. The network manipulate rooms knew it changed into the shot that could run for the rest of the day. The sort of photograph that lives longer than the tale itself. She did not smile. She didn't gloat. She definitely stood consistent and level-headed. As though the hearing wasn't ending, but just beginning. The weight of the day's revelations lingered within the air thick enough to experience in the chest. And because the applause rolled on, spilling past the chamber walls, one query started out to take root far past Washington. Could the country now rally at the back of the lady who stood her floor even as Donald Trump walked away? With the aid of dusk, the pictures became anywhere. News broadcasts opened with the same picture, Trump's returned as he stormed out and Jasmine Crockett standing tall with veterans flanking her. It performed on Lupin bars, dwelling rooms, airport lounges. The headlines weren't diffused. Crockett holds the road veterans stand with Jasmine stroll out heard across the US. In Philadelphia, a Vietnam veteran named Frank Torres spoke right into a nearby station's mic. His voice growly however certain. I've waited 50 years for a person in that constructing to talk straight to a president like that. She failed to blink. Not as soon as. In Dallas, Marcy Hill, nonetheless clutching her folded flag, instructed a reporter, she failed to simply communicate for me. She spoke for each circle of relatives who has been advised to make do with less whilst others take greater. Clips flooded social media, veterans saluting their TVs, families applauding of their kitchens, college students holding up signs studying Jasmine's The United States. Hashtag stranded stand with Crockett service before self. Even late night time. Hosts, commonly sharp-tongued and sarcastic, dropped the punchlines for a night and performed the instant uncut. Polls came in rapid. A flash survey from 3 principal networks showed 72% of viewers approved of how Jasmine handled the listening to amongst veterans and Army families. That range climbed to 84%. Analysts referred to it wasn't just partisanship. It become appreciate for the manner she'd stored her composure whilst handing over blow after blow. In a diner outdoor Cleveland, 2 regulars argued over espresso. One slammed his mug down and stated, "I don't care what party she's from." She spoke the reality and he couldn't deal with it. A lady at the counter nodded in settlement, including, "That wasn't politics. That become individual." The waitress overhearing scribbled Crockett 2028 on her order pad as a comic story, but posted it online later where it spread like wildfire. Cable news breakup display screen Jasmine's steady stance next to Trump's walkout. The assessment was too smooth, too symbolic to ignore. Pundits on every network dissected the optics calm as opposed to chaos carrier versus self-interest. One anchor placed it bluntly. In case you were still unsure approximately who stands for veterans this night, you aren't anymore. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept a low profile. No victory lap, no self-congratulation, she became seen the subsequent morning on foot. Into her office with a small group of staffers, the thick folder from the hearing nonetheless in her hand. Newshounds shouted questions, but she best said, "There's greater work to do." Throughout Theosova, humans had been asking the equal issue in residing rooms, institution chats, and newsrooms if this changed into what she ought to do in a single listening to. What could she do subsequent? And changed into she equipped to take the combat beyond the committee room? The chamber turned into almost empty now. The shuffle of papers, the fading hum of cameras packing up the remote echo of footsteps inside the hallway, handiest fragments of the typhoon that had stuffed this room hours in advance. Jasmine remained at the desk, the thick folder closed in front of her. A single digital camera still rolled the red tally light consistent. She seemed directly into the lens. Her voice was calm, however each word carried the load of the day. Provider is sacrifice, no longer self-interest, no flourish, no preamble, only a truth that reduced instantly to the bone. She let the silence sit for a breath, making sure it sank in. The digital camera stayed tight on her face, the faint reflection of the overhead lighting fixtures glinting in her eyes. It is not about the titles you keep. It is not approximately how loud you can shout your very own name. It's about showing up for people when it prices you something. And if you can't try this, you do not deserve the activity. Her arms stayed nonetheless at the table, her shoulders square. The body commenced to widen, fading slowly right into a montage. Veterans' faces filled the screen. Old and young ladies and men, uniforms crisp and worn. A Marine saluting at a grave. Website. An elderly military nurse sitting in her kitchen, medals lying neatly beside her coffee cup. Sergeant Reeves' status in the gallery, the silver megastar glowing on his chest. Marcy Hill keeping her folded flag. Every face lingered, simply lengthy enough to depart an imprint. Jasmine's voice continued over the pics, steady and resolute. A chief's worth isn't within the electricity they hold, however within the people they shield. Whilst you forget that when you positioned yourself above them, you've already failed. Her tone softened, however the conviction failed to fade. We do not need best leaders. We need present ones, accountable ones, ones who remember that freedom would not come from a signature. It comes from carrier. The display screen dimmed the very last photograph, lingering a line off, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes ahead. The sound faded to nothing. The black display screen keeping for a beat longer than anticipated. And as the remaining frame disappeared, the feeling it left wasn't pretty much politics. It became approximately the type of America human beings nevertheless was hoping for, and the question they had carried long after the video ended. Turned into this the moment Jasmine Crockett's combat became something bigger than a hearing? Once in a while, a person's actual worth isn't always measured with the aid of the power they keep, however by means of the humans they may be willing to stand up for, even when it costs them something, in existence. Each of us will face a moment in which we need to pick among non-public benefit and the best of the network. And that choice will define who we are. While that second comes for you, who will you get up to protect? If this story moved you, do not just scroll beyond it. Like, proportion and enroll in Mr. Reality Tales, wherein the courage to talk becomes the strength to exchange and each voice subjects. Tap the bell due to the fact the next story might not just monitor the fact, it might challenge us to stay it. What moment hit you the hardest? Changed into a reality finally spoken, or the silence that accompanied? Leave your thoughts in the feedback. Permits no longer simply watch, records manifest. Let's stand together and be part of it. This dramatized tale is stimulated by actual struggles and actual people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for observation and schooling. It isn't meant to defame or misinform, but to encourage reflection and civic attention. Thanks for looking. Fact isn't always over. It's just watching for a person to hear.